Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Duncan Knight from the Seaside Heritage Network. I'm one of the trustees. Thank you all for coming and welcome to our March seminar. Now, just before we kick off, a few reminders. The first is about our bucket and spade list, which is your opportunity to nominate your favourite example of seaside heritage, whether it's a building, a place, piece of food, an event, an experience, or something else. So nominations close on Friday. So if you'd like to nominate something for the long list, which then gets whittled down to the short list, Anya's put the link into the chat now. So do nominate away. Now, another event we'd like to tell you about is our Seaside Heritage Symposium on Friday, the 25th of June in Saltdean. And this is an all-day event with speakers, discussions, lunch, and so on. And on the following day, the Saturday, there are two walking tours that have been put on by supporters of the network. One is Brighton Pavilion Grounds and its surrounding area with Dr. Sue Perry. And the other is with Professor Fred Gray, Modernism on Sea, a tour of Rottingdean, Saltdean and Ovingdean. So why not make a weekend of it? Places are limited on these tours, so you need to book in advance. Anya is putting the link into chat as we speak. There you go. So those are coming up in the future. But without further ado, we come to today's seminar, which is about seaside gardens. And as a keen gardener myself, I'm very interested in this seminar. And of course, the weather is starting to get better for gardening. So we've got three green-fingered speakers. And as usual, the speakers will go first, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions. So our first speaker is Julie Rudge, who's chair of the Friends of King's Garden in Southport. Which is a very impressive park located on Southport's promenade. And she's a long-standing volunteer gardener in the King's Garden and an active and enthusiastic chair of the Friends group. So, Julie, thank you for coming, and over to you.
Hi. So, yeah, my name's Julie, and one of the other things I do is I do tours of King's Gardens. They're basically a history tour, and we walk around the South Lake of Southport, and we look at the historical features in the gardens and how they've changed. So at one point in Southport, the tide came in and there was a beach. And that was when it had recently been named Southport. The name Southport has been in use since 1798. And prior to that, in the Domesday book, there was only the village of Churchtown and a few thatched cottages spotted around the dunes. And from that, Southport became a very fashionable Victorian bathing and health resort. They started off by building a seawall in 1835. It took 3 years to hide back the then high tides, which would now seem quite a joke. And then the promenade was built by Peter Hesketh Fleetwood. And this enabled the development of hotels and homes, as well as the Royal Victorian Baths, which are still there. The seawall was 400 yards long, and there's just a tiny little bit of it left at the far end. At this time, there were 11 fathoms of water, just half a mile from shore, and ships could anchor out there. It was a port to both local fishermen and farmers, and as it was located south of Churchtown, it became Southport, even though we are in the northwest. Since then, the shores have slowly silted up with sand from both the Ribble and the Mersey, and this has caused the beach to grow out towards the sea and the sea to recede. Southport quickly developed into a bathing resort as the sea retreated. That became a bit of a dilemma for the founding fathers of the town. The Hesketh landowners eventually agreed to sell all the foreshore which they owned to the Southport Corporation on the condition it could only ever be used for recreational and leisure purposes. And they sold that in 1885, and that still stands. It cannot be ever used for housing. The corporation then commenced development of the lake and the pier, starting in 1887. There was a Venetian water carnival that opened the lake with a flourish, and the gardens were further developed at the turn of the century when Thomas Mawson, famous landscape architect, was appointed to design Lord Street, the Promenade and Marine Park. And this is part of his design that you can see now. Now, not all his ideas were implemented, but they did influence final layout with hedged boundaries, shelters, planted beds and stone balustrades, and stairs and ramps for bath chairs users and lakeside walks. So you can see there the pictures like of the steps and the ramps and everything there. In 1892, a second lake north of the pier was created, and the two were joined several years later. So this is a picture from the 1950s, and as you can see, it was then thriving. Coach loads of people arriving, lots of grounds to walk on. There were loads of tennis courts, the piers there, and the lake was flourishing. But in later years, it fell into disrepair and became very overgrown and was a place for drug addicts and all that sort of stuff. So in 2012, Sefton Council, with local community partners, which included the Friends of King's Gardens, won an HLF award of 5.5 million to restore the gardens and the dilapidated shelters and to bring it all back to its former glory. So this is, as before, the Arts and Crafts building. Now, this building was used for storing tennis equipment, and it was also where you paid to play tennis. There were a lot of tennis courts. Now it's crazy golf and a play area. There is a veranda to this Arts and Crafts Centre. They call it cantilevered seating. So it goes all the way around the building. At the moment, we use it as a base for storing gardening equipment, as well as we've got our history books and everything in there. And the next slide shows you what it looks like now. So it's been done up quite nicely. Opposite this is the play area. So this was what it was like looking down before we developed the play area. You can see the tennis courts. You can see that it's been developed into a lovely children's play area. So when at the time of the regeneration, public consultation was done, and they found that one of the things everybody was asking for was a play area. And they went into the local schools and got loads of ideas, and it's still very, very popular. There was some provision added for disabled children. Initially, there was a big sand pit with lovely diggers, and that sadly had to be closed because needles and things like that were found in it, and it literally cost too much to have it cleaned out every day, which is very, very sad. But it's still a very, very well used play area. So this is what the community garden, which is where the Friends of Garden was like before. There's it's slightly sunken, the garden, and some of the beds are raised, and that was to provide shelter and warming for the plants there. The water feature in the centre was originally a straight-sided pool with a single jet, and it was surrounded by railings, was built in 1912. In the reconstruction, it was decided to make it a lot safer and more child-friendly. And the next slide will show you what it looks like at night. All the little jets coming up and lots of lights as well. It is very, very popular when it works, and in the summer. It doesn't always work. There seems to be lots of parts that break down. One of the things they brilliantly did was they didn't put in a good enough filter for when the grass is cut around it, and the grass gets into the filter and blocks it. So this is a picture of when the gardens were originally opened. When the gardens were constructed originally, they cost £20,000 and they were completed in 1913 and were officially opened by the then King George V and Queen Mary on the 8th of July that year, and there was a great fanfare. It was reopened by Princess Alexandra, who was his great-granddaughter, by the fountain, and there is a plaque there. I think I'm somewhere in that picture, but I'm not quite sure where. There was a Venetian regatta and a carnival on the lake when it was opened. And at dusk, they had all the lake and the boats, and the park was all lit up with fairy lights and lanterns, and there was a firework display. An article in the Southport Visitor at the time said, "At dusk, the myriad of fairy lanterns surrounding the lake and those on the marine park were lighted, and the spectacle produced was acknowledged to be one of the most magnificent ever seen, not only in Southport, but in any part of Lancashire." Southport was in Lancashire then, as the foreshore seemed to lend itself especially to the purpose of decoration. So there we go. There are 9 cast iron shelters around the gardens. They are all identical, and this was them when they were being dismantled. They were built in 1912, again influenced by Thomas Mawson's designs, and they are now Grade 2 buildings listed as of historical significance, and they have been restored to their original colour and design. They were manufactured by a Glasgow firm, David King and Sons, and the ironmonger was from Southport, was Mr. A.S. Robson. And there's a plaque on each shelter. And when they were dismantled, they had to be completely dismantled and taken off-site back to Glasgow for the restoration. Next slide should show it restored. And there you go. You can see one of the lovely ones that is now painted in the original green and cream colours. They are really, really nice part of the gardens. So that is the Venetian Bridge, which is showing you the scene like at night, all lit up. The Venetian Bridge was constructed during 1931. And it was built of timber and concrete with 2 flat outer sections and a central arched section. That meant the 2 islands had to actually be built in the lake for that to happen. The islands are about 200 feet long, and they were used using the sand extracted from the foreshore where they built the Floral Hall. If anybody knows Southport, they will know that the Floral Hall was a big venue back in the day. Even the Beatles came there. And very sadly, it has now been demolished. And they're going to build some new conference centre or something there if one of the building companies that are doing it don't go into liquidation. As you can see, there was a decorative lighting system all across the bridge and the islands. And in actual fact, at the other side of the bridge, that went into the outdoor bathing pool, which was where some of the Miss UKs, etc., were held, which is also no longer with us. The lanterns were all on top of striped posts with white and red bulbs to emulate the Venetian look. And that is a picture from the Italian artist Fortunio Mantegna, painted of the Venetian gala, and it was used to promote the town in 1935. And some of his other works as well are in the local museum, which is the Atkinson Centre. Right. This is one of the buildings that has been restored. There are several buildings that have been restored, and they've all been restored to this sort of decor. There's this one, which is the Marine Light Cafe, and there's one we'll see a bit just afterwards, which is the tea rooms. And there's also a small one at the other end of the lake, which is a booking office if you want to go in the swan boats now. And they've all been done so that they all match and they look similar. So this was originally the ticket office for the boating lake, and it was constructed prior to 1902. It was converted to a cafe in 1922. And so now there has been a cafe on site for over 100 years. The cafe is renovated now and has a new conservatory, which is in keeping with the Edwardian era. It's a slightly longer view of it, and that's just the edge of one of the beds of the garden there and the lake. You can just see a corner of the lake in the background, which is very nice. So this is of the pier, and you can see that was the pier before anything happened to it. The pier was designed by James Brownlees and built by W&J Galloway in just 1 year, which is pretty impressive. It opened in 1860, was extended in 1864, and again in 1868. Southport Pier is referred to as the first true pleasure pier and was one of the earliest piers constructed to be built of iron. It cost £8,700. And on August the 4th, 1859, a large crowd was said to witness the driving home of the first support piles. The opening was then celebrated on August the 2nd, 1860. So literally just under a year. It was designed for both shipping and pedestrians. Originally, the pier was 1,200 yards long, but only 8 years later, it was extended to 1,060 yards, and a new pier head was built to accommodate the larger boats and passenger services from several ports like Liverpool and Blackpool, and even into the 50s, there was a hovercraft. Oh, and as you know, of course, we've just had the funding for the pier, which is quite exciting for us anyway. This is the former ladies' toilets, and they have exactly the same style as the boating ticket office. It was constructed in the early 1900s and was converted in the regeneration programme into tea rooms, which you can see in the next slide. It's got beautiful tiles on the inside, and the windows, or the stained glass windows, have been restored as well. So the fun fair and the fairground. Throughout the development of Southport as a resort, there were stalls and sideshows set up on the beach. And as the front developed with the marine lake and the gardens, the fairground stalls and activities got pushed further and further around the lake, because the Victorians did not like the idea of their ladies walking anywhere near the riffraff of fun fair people. They really weren't regarded as the best. At the turn of the 20th century, the sideshows attractions had become very extravagant. There was an aerial ride, a switchback railway, a water chute, which went into the lake. It shot a big slide that shot boats into the lake. I really wish I could have been around to have done that. And there was a flying machine in 1904 and a helter-skelter. The rides gradually got closed and the fairground got moved round and round and round to where it is now. It's just changed its name, but it's been called Pleasureland. And there is also a railway at that end, which runs from the fun fair right across to the Ocean Plaza, where the shops are. And you will hear more about that in the May talk when Serena, who is one of the Friends of King's Gardens, will talk about her family's involvement with the Silcox family and how they've done the fun fairs there. So I've just got, that's more or less the history of Round the Lakes. There was one slide left, which made me, that's the water chute, sorry. And the next one, and that's the aerial ones, so you can see them there. This one made me laugh. I found it in a book on Southport, and it showed that there was sea bathing for the working class on Sunday mornings where the working class could come because they weren't normally wanted at the same time as everybody else. And I thought it said such a lot about Victoria and Southport. And if you want to see any more, do come and have a look around for yourselves. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Julie. And it's really interesting to hear about the King's Gardens.
Thank you.
If you have any questions, there'll be the opportunity to ask them at the end. So we'll move on now. Our next speaker is Adrian Perry, who's president of Scarborough Civic Society. And he's got long-standing connections with Scarborough. And he's going to talk about Scarborough's South Cliff Gardens. And he was a founder member of the Friends of South Cliff Gardens. So who better to talk about them? So, Adrian, thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, many thanks for asking me to give this presentation about Scarborough. This is a very important anniversary for Scarborough. It's 400 years since Mrs. Farrer discovered the health benefits from drinking Scarborough spa water, which was a brackish tasting laxative that contained traces of minerals. Today, the only visible evidence of the spa water that made Scarborough the first seaside resort in Britain is a well set in the wall and the steps leading down to the beach on the north side of the spa complex. The strong mineral content of the water has stained the stone wall a reddish brown colour. Today, I will concentrate on the history and restoration of the South Cliff Gardens. You'll notice on the slide that there are two logos, the Friends of South Cliff Gardens and Scarborough and District Civic Society. Both organisations have been very involved in getting the gardens restored. It's a large garden, it's 52 acres, and it's on the cliffside. So it's a difficult site to have a garden, but it's a wonderful inheritance provided by the Victorians. You're probably wondering why I'm showing you a bridge. The reason why I'm showing you the bridge is because this was the key investment that stimulated and enabled the development of the gardens. The bridge was opened in 1827, and that gave pedestrian access to the spa waters, which previously was rather difficult, especially at high tide. George Knowles laid out the pleasure gardens so that the customers of the spa could enjoy this delightful access. The Cliff Bridge Company then made serious developments at the spa, replacing the wooden structure with a more distinguished building in 1837, Wyatt's Gothic Saloon. In 1858, it was extended by Joseph Paxton's building, which also included the external grand staircase. This connection through Joseph Paxton certainly helped us to obtain funding from the Heritage Lottery. The present-day gardens consist of three distinct areas. There is the Spa Gardens, the central part of the gardens by George Lord Beeford, who gave us a beautiful rose garden laid out in 1882, and the southern part of the garden, which was a municipal park, also laid out in the 1880s, and finally the garden became one in the 1950s. At the beginning of this century, the gardens were looking uncared for, suffered from blocked views due to self-seeded sycamores and shabby areas of garden which had been simply abandoned. Being on a steep cliff, quite a lot of the paths were damaged and cracked. So this is where we got involved. The Civic Society was particularly interested in the preservation of the 13 wonderful shelters and the other structures in the gardens. Many of the buildings were disfigured by graffiti and most in very poor state of repair. Everybody said somebody should do something about that, and this is when we decided we would step in. If you've got a big problem, I believe in starting with the smaller jobs, otherwise you never get started. We got together a group of volunteers who painted all the shelters and made them look more respectable. Then we commissioned a map of the gardens because being so large, people found it difficult to find a way around the gardens. Volunteers reclaimed the abandoned formal areas, planting donated plants provided by B&Q. These relatively simple actions increased the footfall in the garden and reduced antisocial behaviour. In 2012, we heard about the cliff stabilisation scheme in the Spa Gardens, a £14 million major engineering project with soil nails to stabilise the cliff in parts of the Spa Gardens. When we realised that this work was going to be undertaken, we were concerned about the effect it would have in the gardens. We were reassured that the stabilisation site would be re-landscaped. So then we started to worry about the impact on the rest of the gardens because they needed a similar makeover. We found out that the Heritage Lottery had a scheme called Parks for People. We convinced the council that it would be a good idea if they put in an application for the £5 million which was available. In 2017, we got past the first stage, and in 2018, we were told by the Heritage Lottery that if the public could raise a significant amount of money locally, it would demonstrate local support for the application. A campaign was launched for Saving Our Gardens and managed to raise over £100,000 in only 6 weeks. I think this went a long way to make the Heritage Lottery convinced that it was a good idea to give us the money. And in 2019, we were told that the Stage 2 bid was successful. It actually took until 2023 to get all the work done in the gardens because of COVID and the Ukraine war, which slowed down the whole project. We had a wonderful celebration because for us, this project had taken more than 10 years to complete. The Heritage Lottery Fund had very clear ideas about what they wanted from the scheme. The heritage outcomes included that the garden should be better managed with a higher level of maintenance and better interpretation about the history of the gardens. The people outcomes included developing skills, learning about the heritage, along with more volunteering in the garden. And the community outcomes would be a better place to live, work and visit, better environmental impact and more people engaged. What did we actually achieve? One thing was rather contentious, as we needed to clear quite a lot of trees. However, people did accept that it was essential that quite a few mature trees needed removal. In mitigation, we planted lots of trees to offset the loss of the self-seeded sycamores while opening up many views towards the sea. All the structures received expert restoration, sometimes altered because the Heritage Lottery insisted on trying to improve access for disabled people. And you can see here at the back of this shelter a new wheelchair entry. This enabled access onto the main terrace, an improvement to the Edwardian design. In the Italian gardens, the impressive colonnade was restored. It's ironic that in 2019, one of the columns had been blown down by the heavy wind just before the work started in that area. We took that as another signal that we'd started the restoration just in time. Many steps and paths were completely relaid with proper metal edges to the paths, making future maintenance much easier and straightforward. Surprisingly, we have trouble with wildlife in these gardens. We have deer, rabbit, and squirrels, which either dig up the plants or eat them. We're now very careful about what is planted. We've discovered that forget-me-not seems to be a plant which manages to flower profusely in spite of the wildlife attentions. In the gardens, we also have beach chalets, which have formed an important part of Scarborough's coastline in the South Bay since they were built in 1912. But In March 2018, a build-up of water pressure caused a retaining wall to collapse and cause irreparable damage to a number of the chalets. A further collapse in November of the same year damaged additional chalets, which unfortunately led to their demolition in December 2019 due to safety concerns. It was too late to have the problem included in the HLF Parks for People project. This complex of chalets and cafes are listed Grade 2, so the design brief stated that the chalets must match those that were lost on an absolute like-for-like basis, with identical architectural appearance and the same curved form, scaling and siting. It was also essential that the reinstated chalets match the surviving chalets that sit adjacent to the ones that were lost to damage. So great care was taken in the restoration, which was funded by the council. We have 13 shelters in the gardens, and as you can see from the picture, they've received complete restoration. This particular building was unfortunate that it had been pushed forward by the steep bank above. It needed special treatment, so the engineers put a steel frame inside to secure the future as a Grade 2 structure. One structure had to be demolished and rebuilt with the greatest of care to ensure that the finished shelter was an exact reconstruction of the original. We now have newly restored buildings with some marvellous views over the South Bay. The magnificent Paxton design stairs at the spa required major work to renew damaged or missing stonework. Some previous repairs required upgrading from concrete moulded pilasters to beautiful turned stone from quarry near Huddersfield. Another example of the high quality detail work undertaken on this project. This composite slide shows the work done on renovating railings, which were dangerous rusty wrecks. They're now ready for another 100 years plus. The tunnel, which reopened an important link from the Spa Gardens to the southern end of the gardens. This also enabled an accessible route from the town to the southern end of the gardens. If people stay on that route, they will not be confronted by steps. Previously, people in wheelchairs found great difficulty in navigating the gardens. The 10 large interpretation panels scattered around the garden give a good guide to and inform the visitor. An important addition to the gardens is Beeford Hive, with the dual function as the base for the professional gardening team and the community room, which is used by the Friends and many other groups. These are diverse as school visits because we have an outside classroom with one of the best views in Scarborough and the record music group. We also have a new children's play area, a clever design utilising the steep banks and well located near toilets and a cafe. This is our 20th anniversary, and when the group was created in 2006, we couldn't have dreamed that we would have a garden of such quality. It's heartwarming to have this recognised, and in 2025 we were awarded a European award, and Yorkshire in Bloom presented us with their Platinum Award. And we also have the Green Flag Award. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Adrian. You've achieved something really quite remarkable in the South Cliff Gardens. When we come up for our big day out in September, we'll make sure that we have a look at it.
Right.
As before, if you have any questions for Adrian, please save them for the end. And now we'll move on. Our third speaker needs no introduction. It's Kathryn Ferry, who's chair of the Seaside Heritage Network. As you'll know, she's an architectural historian who's published widely on many aspects of seaside heritage. And she's able to talk with authority on almost any aspect of seaside heritage. So today she's going to talk to us about floral clocks at the seaside. Kathryn.
Okay, thank you very much, Duncan. Yes, it's quite surprising what I can lend my hand to. So floral clocks, I'm going to give you. It's just hopefully everybody can see that. They're a bit of a niche thing, but in terms of seaside gardens were relatively prevalent and certainly something that visitors considered to be quite an attraction. So I just go to my second one. This is Bridlington, and thousands of people watched the clock at Bridlington here, set in motion on the 19th of June in 1907. And that's the press report there from the Leeds Mercury. It was on the lawn outside the floral pavilion, as you can see in the right-hand picture. It had a diameter of 12 foot, and the whole thing was 9 foot across. So I think the clock face was 12 foot. They reckoned about 10,000 flowers were used in the formation of the geometrical design of circles, ovals, and Maltese crosses there. And it was work of the town's gardener, Mr. Southport. Now, the press in their reporting described it as the only one of its kind in England, but it wasn't the only one in Britain. So there is an important distinction there, because the first floral clock, this is the kind of trivia you're never going to be asked, but just in case, the world's first floral clock was created at Prince's Gardens in Edinburgh. It opened in spring 1904, and 50 years later, an article about it in the Scots magazine described it as the most photographed object in Scotland. And if you consider the range of possibilities of photographic subjects in Scotland, that seems to be quite some claim. Every quarter of an hour, the sound of a cuckoo burst forth from this clock. It was 22 feet in diameter, and its movements used weights like in a grandfather clock. So the mechanism here was created by Messrs. James Ritchie and Sons Limited, clockmakers of Edinburgh. And actually, in the first instance, they didn't make the mechanism specifically for this clock. It was actually salvaged from Ely Parish Church, where Ritchie's they were taking a clock down from the tower there, and so they reused it. And that mechanism actually lasted until 1936 before it had to be replaced. Ritchie's are important because they subsequently supplied the clock mechanisms for Southport, Blackpool, Southend, Weymouth, Bridlington, as we've seen, Brighton and Hove. Now, up until a few hours ago, I didn't know about this clock, but I went to my local collector's fair this morning and found this postcard, which refers to the flower clock in Grove Park. And the postmark, if you can see it down the bottom, is 1909. So this is another early example, though it's interesting that it's got this kind of star shape around it. It's not specifically called a floral clock, but the flower clock, it's the same thing, isn't it? So this kind of comes after Bridlington. I put the back of the postcard in simply because it talks about Seeing You Tomorrow being sent from Weston-super-Mare to Llandaff in South Wales, and they're going to take the boat from Weston in the days when the paddle steamers would go across the water between Somerset and South Wales. So a latecomer to the story. I don't really know anything about this one yet, but I wanted to put it in for you. So Bridlington is 1907. This probably comes next. And then in Swansea, in Victoria Park, they had a floral clock created in 1911. And then we really get into the sort of heyday of floral clock building, which is definitely between the wars. And I think the first one in that I could find was in the Italian Gardens at Stanley Park in Blackpool, which opened in July 1933. This one was planted in crimson, white and gold. The mechanism and the cuckoo were both hidden in a brick building in the bushes nearby. But there were complaints that the cuckoo wasn't loud enough. So the park authorities arranged for it to be amplified so that it could be heard all over the park, which is a slightly funny idea, the idea of this cuckoo piping up on the quarter hour, probably anywhere in the park, and not in springtime. Next one is Weston-super-Mare, which I showed you on my first slide. The beautiful floral clock praised. This one opened in 1935. Even though we now know, or I now know, that there was one in the Edwardian period, the council in 1935 took some convincing to create this much larger, more splendid floral clock. But they were finally persuaded by the Reverend Frank Collins, who was a retired Methodist minister whose chief interest in life was now flowers. And Collins was chairman of the Western Gardeners Association and indeed a past president of the National Sweet Pea Society. So he backed Mr. Norman, who was the superintendent of Weston Parks, and the council, and they asked the borough surveyor, Mr. H.A. Brown, who was responsible for Weston-super-Mare Lido and also for the Winter Gardens and the Winter Gardens Pavilion, to prepare a design, which is what he did. The quote from the local paper said, Mr. Collins said he would not be surprised if scores of photographs of the clock were taken each day by holidaymakers from all parts of the country. So, you know, this might be just a mere garden feature, but it was at the time in the 1930s very much seen as a novelty and seen as a way of getting extra publicity for the resort, because if people are buying postcards of the floral clock and they're sending them to their friends around the world, around the country, you know, that's all publicity for Weston. And in Weston-super-Mare Museum, there is this lovely souvenir clock in the shape of the floral clock, which I thought was a wonderful thing. Whether that was only Weston-super-Mare that produced that, I don't know, but it gives you that sort of sense of the clock in the clock, which is a perfect souvenir in my book. Here we've got three others that date from the 1930s. Southsea on the bottom, Southport up the top, and Leeds Mercury, again, reported on that one on the Tuesday, the 14th of July, 1936. It said, among this year's garden wonders at Southport is the floral clock in Hesketh Park. There are crowds round it from morning to night, watching the movement of its 10-foot minute hand and 7-foot hour hand. The clock face is set with 25,000 plants, including horseleeks, feverfew, and stonecrop. Very hardy varieties compose the background. They will live the whole year. And you can see how splendid that looks in the postcard illustration there. The Portsmouth Evening News in February 1939 talked about the clock at Southsea on the bottom left there, which was to be a feature of the garden beds in front of Southsea Castle Cafe during the coming season. So the corporation have accepted the offer of Smith's Electric Clocks Limited to supply a clock 18 foot in diameter, complete with motion work, bevel gears and a special motor at a cost of £112, 9 shillings and 6pence. The final one on this slide is New Brighton, but I haven't been able to find out very much information about that. So if anybody knows, I'd certainly be interested. Clocks often had a commemorative function, particularly where coronations were concerned. So this one at Hastings was planted out to commemorate the coronation of King George IV. And you can see that here, you've got the crown up above the clock itself and the king's name in the set in flowers underneath the clock. In 1941, it was replanted with a sterner wartime message. This was, of course, the period when Dig for Victory was an intensifying campaign. The Folkestone, Hythe, Sandgate and Cheriton Herald stated that the many colours of bedding plants that made it gay in peacetime are now replaced by the more sober green of haricot beans. Mr. C.E. Cherry, the park superintendent, chose this site to place these valuable vegetables, rich in protein, in order to draw attention to their value as a winter food supply. So now it's got a kind of propaganda value, this floral clock. Another interwar floral clock is seen here from 1936. This one is in Green Hill Gardens in Weymouth, installed, as I said, in 1936. It has been there ever since, but wasn't in great shape. So in June 2024, the mechanism, as you can see in the bottom slide, was entirely renewed and it was reopened, and that was thanks to the Friends of Green Hill Gardens. So I think there is absolutely no doubt, about having heard our previous two speakers, about the clear benefits of having these friends groups and the impact that they can make in transforming these spaces, restoring them and bringing them into beneficial use going forwards. And this was supported by Weymouth Town Council. Another example of where the clock has been restored is this one at Panet Park in Whitby. This one was again created in 1953. It's a coronation clock for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. It was given to the town by Whitby Chamber of Trade to mark that event, but by 1979 it had pretty much fallen into disrepair and had just turned into a standard flower bed. So it was after a friends group was established in 2005 that they actually set to work restoring this. And as you can see, each season you can put different colours into the bedding of these. So any postcards that you see of these floral clocks historically, they can take many different forms, because every year the planting might be different and the wording might be different depending on any kind of anniversaries in that year. So here is another coronation clock from 1953. This was at Hove. Sadly, last summer, Brighton and Hove City Council announced plans for a makeover of Palmyra Square, which was to include the removal of the floral clock. And you can see the BBC website story about this. Subsequently, 1,700 people signed a petition against the clock's removal. So you wouldn't think it was that an important thing, really, but evidently local people did feel some affection for this. And there's a Facebook site created by the Friends of Hove Floral Clock specifically. Unfortunately, it looks like the planned removal is going ahead anyway, which is rather sad, given that I've just shown you the examples of what was possible at Whitby and Weymouth. Floral clocks weren't just in the UK. The idea was exported. They were also in Canada and America. I've seen examples there. This one is at Ostend, Belgium's leading seaside resort, so still by the sea. It's on the edge of Leopold Park. King Leopold II was the major patron of Ostend. And this clock was moved here in 1963. So you can see the kind of 60s look of the planting there, nice and bright. Apparently, the date is displayed in flowers to this day and is updated daily throughout the summer months. So they must have an impressive team of gardeners there. So that is the end of all you ever need to know about floral clocks. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Kathryn. Who knew there were so many floral clocks in seaside resorts? Okay, we've got time for a few questions. So if you've got a question, please do type it into chat. And I'll start off with a question from Anya, in fact, who asks Julie and Adrian, how many volunteers do you need to maintain your gardens in Southport and Scarborough? And do you have any contribution from the councils? Or is it all volunteer-led? Adrian, I think, has left the room. Julie, maybe you can start with Southport.
Right. We started off with about 8 gardeners. We're down to 4 because I'm one of the youngest ones and I'm 74. And sadly, you know, we have lost people through old age that they either can no longer garden or they're no longer with us. We get very limited support from Green Sefton, which is the local parks and gardens. For example, we're not allowed to cut the grass or the hedges, but when they come and do the hedges, they'll only do the outsides of the hedges. They won't do the insides, and we're not allowed to use equipment. So we're only allowed pruners. So no, on the whole, it is just us applying for help, you know. Just recently, because there's no, where we've gardened, there's no water. We can't use the fountain water, obviously. So the local council ward have given us some money for a bowser so that we can go from where we store our stuff down to where the gardens is, and actually be able to water the plants. The advice we were given by Parks and Gardens was buy drought-resistant plants.
Yeah, sometimes easier said than done, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Adrian, how many volunteers have you got in the
Well,
Southcliffe
we've
Gardens?
probably got about 10 that are very active, but we've got 100 members. A lot of the people just actually want to know what's happening in the gardens, and so we send out a newsletter every month, and people respond to that. But the people that actually come in and do gardening, it's a more of a tight bunch. But we've still got, with it being 52 acres, which is a lot even for the team of gardeners, council gardeners. We've got certain areas in the garden that we tend to look after, and that seems to give more motivation to the volunteers, shall we say, because they can walk past it. It's almost like it's their garden. Where we're based on Southcliffe, a lot of the accommodation in that area, people are living in flats. So they probably don't have a garden of their own. So it's nice that they can go and do a bit of gardening and plant things and what, get the satisfaction of watching things grow and look beautiful.
And do you get much support from the council?
Well, it's a bit of a love-hate relationship, it always is. But we do get, enough support to say that the volunteers still, are enthusiastic. Certainly, we couldn't possibly have done the restoration in the gardens without working with the council. I mean, it was a real exercise in, working together. And I would say, when we were going through the first stages of getting the Heritage Lottery on side, we were really very, very involved as a group. But then when we got past stage one, then we lost control, shall we say, because the Heritage Lottery, of course, aren't just going to give the Friends group £5 million and say, you decide what you're going to do with it. They want to be absolutely certain that there's a complete community involvement. So all of a sudden, all sorts of other groups, community groups in Scarborough, all got involved in the project. And, so in fact, it improved the overall project to get more people involved. So what started off really as a Friends project suddenly exploded into a real community project.
Okay, thanks. Couple of questions for Kathryn.
Yep.
Sue asks, I don't know how well you know Southsea. Sue asks where the clock was in Southsea.
Yes, there have been some replies to that, I think, but it was near the castle, which is gone, I think, where the D-Day Museum is now. Thank you very much, Jackie Baines, for replying to that. It was a sort of, it was a 1930s cafe building, I think, down there, which is gone.
And then another question is, were the clock mechanisms actually buried in the soil?
Yes, some of them were, but then that Weymouth one has its own little building separately. The Blackpool one, there was a brick building in the bushes, so they weren't necessarily underneath the clock face. They could be sort of to the side of it or somewhere. I'm not sure where the Bridlington one was hidden. I think the Edinburgh one again was the Edinburgh one, I think, was in the base of a statue next to the clock. So there were ways of sort of hiding it in the vicinity without having to bury it.
Okay, and Diane reckons there was a tidal clock at Cleethorpes as well. Do you know anything about that one?
I don't know about tidal clocks. I was just looking at the flowery variety.
Right, yeah.
But I'm sure Cleethorpes people will be able to comment on that.
Okay. Carol asks about funding for Southport Pier.
Sorry, can I just say to Kathryn that via Anya's email, I've sent a couple of pictures that I found locally about the New Brighton one.
Okay,
if I
thank
find
you very
anything
much.
else, I'll send it on to you.
Thank you.
Southport Pier funding, yes, it is now being confirmed. But we've got no idea when it's going to start, because apparently one of the things is, of course, that these iron piers were built quite some time ago, same with the ones in Blackpool that are also rusting up quite badly, is that there's no firms that are actually out there that you can say, oh yes, that's the firm to go to, you know, to redo an iron pier. Nobody does the work anymore, so you know it's finding firms that can deal with it. But the money has been confirmed, yes. And today there was something on the local news about them taking things off the pier, like the old train and that. So hopefully, it's very sad in a way, you know, about getting the funding, because the funding, in our heads anyway, only came through when people came to Southport because of the sad events of that Taylor Swift dance party with the young girls. And, you know, sort of things for Southport seem to have come out from that, but it was a very sad way to get the money.
Okay. There's another comment from Carol, who reckons there was a floral clock in Skegness.
Yes, very helpfully. Some people have been adding to these bits in the chat, and I've just seen a picture of the Cleethorpes tidal clock, which does indeed look like a floral clock, so may well have been one and the same thing. So that's something to follow up in the whole kind of index catalogue of seaside floral clocks. Thank you for that. Yes, somebody said that has said that they remember a floral clock in Skegness as a child as well. So it's highly likely. I did buy a postcard in my collecting this morning of a flower bed near the boating lake in Skegness, which had the Jolly Fisherman in flowers on this, that said Skegness is so bracing. So you know, you can do anything with flowers, can't you?
Yeah. Does anyone here know anything about Eastbourne? We've got a question, quite a controversial garden question here about Eastbourne. Kathryn, do you know anything about this?
Well,
the carpet gardens being replaced by prairie planting.
It's very contentious locally. Yeah. The Eastbourne carpet gardens were such a kind of attraction along the seafront for decades. They were planted by the Victorians, and they were on the kind of brochure covers into the 1970s and beyond. You know, they were really crucial to Eastbourne. I think the council had sort of taken this decision to try and be more sustainable in the planting species that varieties of plants that need less water and that kind of thing. But the overall effect is so different from the carpet gardens there that yeah, there's a lot of people that aren't very happy with it.
A lot of interesting clocks. So just a couple more questions about that. How are they powered today? Because Sue's talking about a school clock that had to source £10,000 to convert it to run on electricity. So the ones that survive, how are they powered?
Well, some of them were electric anyway.
Okay.
So I'm not sure about the Edwardian ones, but there are references in some of the later ones to being powered by electricity anyway. And I suppose if they kept going, they probably were. So I'm not quite sure what the mechanism on the Weymouth one is. Yeah, I don't know how. Oh, sorry.
Also, there's talk from Sue about one in Worthing. They seem to be all over the place. Anyway, we better draw things to a close there. So thank you for all those comments. Can I end by thanking our three speakers, Julie, Adrian, and Kathryn. Please use the react icon or just switch on your camera and give everybody a big round of applause. Thank you.
Can I do a plug for my talk, please?
Well, I was going to mention it last.
Okay. All right.
So
okay,
I've got some final announcements. Lots of applause coming in. That's good to see. So yeah, thank you to our speakers. Just so that you know, our next seminar is Wednesday, the 6th of May. It's called All the Fun of the Fair. So it's about entertainment. Our speakers, as you've heard, will include Serena Silcott and Alan Brodie. Anya's put details in the chat. We also have a fundraising seminar in July, on July the 8th. called Murder at the Seaside. Now, we're now a registered charity and we do need to raise funds to keep our activities going. So, like last year, there's a small charge to attend. Murder at the Seaside, but it'll be worth it because we've got people from a speaker from Burr Island off Devon, somebody from Torquay about the Agatha Christie connection, and a speaker from the She Done It podcast. In September, we have our annual Big Day Out. So last year we were online, but this year we're going back to the seaside, to Scarborough. And so if you'd like to join us there, you'd be very welcome. It's Friday, the 18th of September. Save the date, and details will be following some stage shortly. And then lastly, can I give a plug for the latest ferry talk by our very own Kathryn Ferry? The next one is next Wednesday, which is 1st of April, on 90 years of Butlins design. You can book on Ticket Source, and Anya has put the link in the chat. So do come along. So thank you once again to our speakers. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We have had a great attendance today. And good evening. Goodbye.